There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Well, this is incredible. I am here with BookTube royalty, Karen of Runwright Reads, joining us from New York City. Karen and I would say, we're friends. We've never talked like this, so it's very special. And she's wearing a fabulous gay blouse for me.
It is
welcome,
for you.
welcome, Karen.
Thank you.
If you don't know, and if you don't know, where have you been? But if you don't know, Karen has a fantastic channel called Runwright Reads. And Karen, please tell us about the kind of stuff you do over there.
Hi, Sean, and hi, Sean's viewers. It is a pleasure to be here. I have been watching obsessively Sean's channel for several years, and recently just watching these book chats and getting to meet some people who have been commenting on videos for a long time and we've never seen them or heard them talk about books. And so it is a fantastic pleasure and privilege to be here to also talk a little bit about a book that I have read recently and love. But yeah, to talk a little bit about my channel. So Runwright Reads comes about because back in a previous life, I used to run for fun. I still enjoy running. I just don't do much of it anymore. So now we focus.
I think you run after a beautiful little daughter.
I run after my toddler, yes. And I read a lot. I like to read lots of different things. I like to travel the world in books. A few years ago, we started an initiative called Caribathon, where we are promoting reading Caribbean literature. And it's been fantastic as I have discovered books that represent my heritage because I'm from Jamaica, and also just connecting with other people who enjoy reading the world. And so I love BookTube, and it is a joy to be here to celebrate BookTube and BookTube connections with you, Sean.
That's fantastic. Now remind us, when is Caribathon?
It's in June.
And we're here to talk about a Caribbean novel, hot off the press in English translation, Blue by Emmelie Prophète, translated from the French by my friend, Tina Kover. You loved it. Tell us why, Karen.
I did. So I am psyched that you know the translator because, you know, I've heard you talk about this in previous videos, how much a translator influences what we get from the novel. And so I think it is a credit to Tina Kover that she has represented this book so beautifully. So Blue, it's small, and it is just it's so immersive. It's the kind of story that the author, I think, gives us an opportunity as readers to really imagine ourselves meeting her and hearing her story and hearing what she represents about her family and about her life and her history and the challenges and the accomplishments versus failures. It's represented in poetic prose or prose poetry, I'm not sure which, right, because it's that kind of language and writing where the sentences they're thoughts. They're not necessarily complete representations, they're more thoughts, and very imaginative, very descriptive as this author is representing her life and her family's history. It's the kind of writing that really speaks to me because I feel like the author is giving us so much, but she's also giving us an opportunity to take our own impressions and make the story personal to us. So as an immigrant, the story that she tells here, you know, it has characteristics that I could relate to, but she also describes stories of immigrants, people who don't make it. And so it's almost a cautionary story. It's so rich. The stories that she's telling in this book primarily focus on the women in her family. She's talking about her mother and her two aunts and the different experiences that they had in Haiti and trying to leave Haiti. She's also talking about herself as a young woman leaving Haiti and trying to carry that family's dream. And she talks about other children who wanted that dream but didn't live long enough to realize that vision. And so there's a lot of description in this book. She doesn't always give details, but she gives very descriptive moments of her life and the lives that she observes. The story takes place in an airport, and we're left to wonder whether she should actually leave this airport. Especially in the beginning of the book, there is a little bit of projection of her story onto other travelers and other people who are leaving a destination or going to a destination, maybe kind of imagining what their lives are like and maybe how different her life could be if she took another road, the road less traveled, I suppose. In the back of the novel, there's an about the author, and it says she still lives in Port-au-Prince.
It's very short. Did you feel a sense of satisfaction that it was enough, or did you finish it wishing for more?
So that's an interesting question, because I feel like even when the story ends here, that it doesn't end, because we can imagine the different opportunities and the different options that are available to this narrator. She's given us enough of her story for us to imagine what happens when she does go back to Haiti, and the connections that she has there, her family, the longing that she's bringing with her, the people that would have wanted to take that trip with her, but who died overseas, unable to return. And so whether she goes to stay, and even if she goes, how the story ends, you can imagine the other ways that it could end.
I see you have lots of fabulously colored tabs there. Is there a short passage that you might like to read to us to give us a sense of the writing?
I thought you would never ask. So I will read actually the first page. Is just 2 paragraphs.
Great.
I read the first page of this book. The land seems boundless here. Life curled in, folded onto itself. Seen from here, the world is immense and small at the same time. All this green. These wetlands are and have always been imaginary fences. The war was over, people said. The girls had heard nothing, understood nothing about that war. Nazis and allies meant nothing to them. The world hardly communicated at all with the province blue, buried deep in a country mired forever in the Caribbean Sea, in misery. It was a world far from the world, a world you had to leave in order to live. 3 girls born here when it was no place to be born and no place to be female. Between dead fields and bleak rivers, the only dream they had inherited was the dream of leaving, going far away from this silent stepmother of a land. The road that led to school was too long. They didn't see why it was necessary to go there so early every morning, half asleep, bellies empty, to come home too late, too tired to face the household chores expected of girls. It's a story I've heard dozens of times, one I never really thought I was giving much attention, even as it settled into my mind, heavy and soft, as only a mother's legacy can be. ...
That's very engaging. While you were reading it, I looked up a Kindle preview, so I want to read this sentence back to you because it's quite striking. The world hardly communicated at all with the Province Blue, buried deep in a country mired forever in the Caribbean Sea in misery. I was going to ask you about the title anyway, so what is the Province Blue?
The color blue is discussed in different ways. Of course, we're talking about the blue Caribbean Sea, and that expands that richness, that expectation that we have. We talk about the beaches and that blue water. And when you go close, is it really blue? A little bit of that expectation and disappointment, perhaps. But she also speaks about blue in lots of other iterations and variations. She talks about blue in terms of religion. There's discussion of spirituality and how the Virgin Mary is always pictured as wearing blue. And a little bit of that religious thought is discussed in the story as well.
And it also draws my attention to the last 2 words of that sentence, set off with a comma, in misery. So the word blue meaning sadness. Does that fit? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Karen, you did such a fabulous job of promoting it that I think maybe Tina will send you a check.
Oh, I would love that. I would love to chat with Tina about this book.
Well, that can certainly be arranged. Oh, well, I don't want to speak for her, but yeah, she's a good person to talk to, as are you. Karen, thank you.
On Instagram.
Karen, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean. It was a pleasure to be here.
Lara from Newfoundland is back. Lara, thank you for stopping by again.
Delighted.
We are here to talk about a novel by a Canadian writer, although it's not really a Canadian in theme. It's a historical novel called Undersong by Kathleen Winter, published this August, and you loved it.
I loved it. Up until I read Undersong, or at first I listened to the audiobook of Undersong, Shuggie Bain was my firm favorite of the year. And now I might have a tie. So that's how much I love it. And
wow.
I believe you love Shuggie.
Oh, yes. My book of last year, yes.
Yeah, so it gives you an idea of how good this book could be.
So tell us about this novel.
Well, first of all, it's dedicated to Dorothy Wordsworth, whose much more famous brother most people would recognize, being William Wordsworth, the Romantic poet. The guy who wrote "We Wander Lonely as a Cloud." That's the one poem that most people know.
He was recollected in tranquility. Was that him?
Yeah, when all at once I saw a cloud, a host of golden daffodils. Yeah, that one.
Okay.
So it's dedicated to Dorothy Wordsworth, and it concentrates on her, it focuses on her. William is in it, but she's very much the central focus of the book. And it opens essentially with her death. She died at 83, and it opens with James Dixon, who has been her confidant and her companion, really her servant for 40 years. He was hired as a young man in his late teens to be the gardener on the Wordsworth estate. Part of his job is basically to be a surrogate brother for Dorothy, who was mostly called Rotha in the book, which I guess was her nickname. And so James and Rotha spent a lot of time together over the course of 40 years. And it opens with James, on the event of her death, going to tell the bees that Dorothy Wordsworth has died. And for anybody who's not familiar with that tradition, there's an English tradition, I don't know if people do it in other parts of the world, where if you own bees, when somebody in the family dies, you go and tell the bees what has happened.
Wow, that is news to me. So I'm going to say one thing at the out before we go any further. The Goodreads synopsis for this novel is incredibly detailed. It doesn't give away the ending, but it does give quite a bit of information about how the story is set in motion. So if you think this chat is spoilery, it's not, because there's a lot of detail in the Goodreads, and I don't think we're going to say nearly everything that's there. And then I have a question before you go any further. Dorothy Wordsworth had a brother. Why did she need a surrogate brother?
William doesn't come off really well in this book. He is a little bit dismissive about Dorothy. He might be like the text that everybody knows, but she's the subtext in this book to his writing all the time. And in fact, there's a not so subtle hint of plagiarism. There's an inference in the book that she was more than the muse behind his work, that he was a bit of a vampire, that she was the one who was more in tune with nature. She had lots of elegant observations, some of them quite wild. She was a bit of a wild child, the nature girl. She was the one out wandering in the woods and coming upon a host of daffodils and keeping a journal about it. And one of James Dixon, her servant's jobs, was to mine her journals with William to find material that he then worked into his own texts that, made him famous. And I have no idea how much of this is based on historical research or, to what extent Kathleen Winter let her imagination go into play. But in this book, the very strong theme is that William Wordsworth may have been a fabulous writer, but Dorothy Wordsworth was very much an influence and perhaps a little bit plagiarized.
Experience plagiarized in tranquility.
Yes.
So the fact that James colluded with her brother on kind of mining her journal, there's some nuances to his character.
Definitely. James very clearly admires Dorothy. He perhaps loves Dorothy. He respects Dorothy, but he also thinks that maybe she's a bit mad. He is the person, if she has something that seems like a depressive episode, administers laudanum. I think he loves her, but he feels conflicted because, he's employed by the Wordsworths, and William Wordsworth is the man of the house and therefore his employer. And he has, he has his duties, and that includes basically stealing from Dorothy. The women are very much repressed, and their occupational and intellectual options are limited, and doesn't work out well for them. It's very much not a plot-driven novel. It's very sort of contemplative. It's quite elegant. It is poetic. There are parts that are certainly melancholic, but it's so beautiful at the same time. Like, I appreciate lyrical language and poetry and, fabulous descriptions of nature. So there are a few times where I got a little misty because it was just so beautifully written.
Do we know does she live at Montreal?
She lives in Montreal, but she spent many years in Newfoundland.
Oh.
I could be wrong, but I think her parents are British and that she spent a lot of her formative years here in Newfoundland, and now lives in Montreal.
So you're claiming her, in other words?
She is at least part Newfoundland. If she wants to call herself a Newfoundlander, I have no issue with it.
I have not read anything by her, but this one is where I'm going to start.
One of the things that she does really well in this book that I think she hasn't done before is she writes in period style for part of it, which I don't think she's done a lot of historical fiction, so that was cool to experience. Can I just read you one sentence?
Please, go ahead. Yes, by all means.
I told you how James Dixon and William Wordsworth harvested from Dorothy's journals. And one of the things that James says was, we harvested his sister's weightless and golden thoughts. He did not have anything like those himself. Just the idea that somebody has weightless and golden thoughts. Like, wouldn't you like somebody to say that about your thoughts one day?
Yes, I would. And I don't think I'm going to have an occasion to.
So, yes, pick her up. This was possibly my book of the year. William Wordsworth is never a narrator, but a tree is. So if you like interesting narrators, put it on your list.
Very interesting. Thanks so much, Lara.
Thank you.
What a special treat to have Chris from Connecticut and of the Book Cougars podcast back to talk about another book. Welcome back, Chris.
Well, thanks, John. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's fantastic. So we're here to talk about a work of, popular history, certainly a work of history. The White Ship by Charles Spencer. We both have it. It looks like you've got a lovely hardcover there.
Yes, with all my tabbies.
Yeah, great. The subtitle is Conquest, Anarchy, and the Wrecking of Henry I's Dream. I haven't read this yet. Tell me what it's about, Chris.
It is about Henry I just having conquered Normandy, and he's going back to England with all of his knights and his children. They're going in multiple ships. Yep. The man who was the son of the captain of William the Conqueror's ship, who was Henry I's father, comes and offers to take him back to England in the White Ship, which is like the fastest ship, blah, blah, blah. He's like, no, I already have plans, but you can take my son and all the other aristocrats and my other illegitimate children and these knights, take them. So Henry sails off. He thinks everything's great. He's, conquered. He's one of the most important kings now in Europe. And his son and all of the knights are drinking and partying it up on ship before they take off. They start having the crew drink, which is never a good idea. And one of the guys gets off the ship. It was Stephen.
Yes.
So Stephen gets off the ship. The ship takes off, and they let the sails up too soon. So they're going too fast out of the port and they hit this rock that's still there. And it's dark because they're sailing at nighttime. And everybody on land knows that it's a party ship. So they hear this big yell and they just think, oh, well, they're partying.
Open it up.
And they hit this rock, right? And it starts sinking pretty quickly. And the son, also, the heir to the throne,
William,
Henry's the only legitimate son, actually gets away in the one rowboat with his security detail. They get him away, but he hears his sister crying for him to come back. So they go back and they're swamped. Of course, people who are in the water, it's just like the movie The Titanic.
That's
they
right.
swamp the boat. The only survivor is this guy who's a butcher. This lowly guy who the only reason he's on this ship was because the knights who owed him money didn't pay him. So he hopped on the ship to follow them to get his payment. And one of the theories of why he survived is because he's dressed in peasant clothing, leather and wool, and also, of his trade, he's a butcher. And the other people, there was a knight who was hanging onto this piece of wood with him, slips away in the night because he's in all this fine clothing, silk and all of that. So that's the theory of why this one man survived. And he's the only witness to what happened.
And there's he wrote or dictated or whatever, a very, very vivid account of it.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and we're talking about the year 1120.
Yes, November 1120.
Yeah.
So that water was really cold. So people didn't have much of a chance to even swim back if they were strong swimmers.
So the butcher was the only survivor. This was, tragic, but also very significant for the next many, many decades in British history.
Yes, it set off this whole Civil War, really. I know, and I think Spencer mentions that most people think of the English Civil War as being much later, but this was a civil war in a lot of ways. And he says it's the bloodiest time period of English history. Because what happens was this one heir dies. Henry is, of course, devastated. He gets his knights and supporters to swear that they will have his daughter Matilda crowned queen when he dies and to be his successor, right? But there's gender issues involved.
Sure.
There's family connections through marriage involved. Matilda was married to the Holy Roman Emperor. So people were also worried about foreign influence, which is kind of odd because everybody, it seemed, was marrying across the channel. But Matilda comes to fight for what is hers. Stephen, the nephew of Henry, who some people are saying is the more legitimate heir because he's a man. They have this really long fight.
Yeah.
I mean, bloody back and forth. People are imprisoned and escape. But Stephen dies and Henry II is crowned. It's Matilda's son. Eventually becomes Henry II. One of the things is there's a ton of Matildas in this book. It was a very popular name.
Wow.
So while I was reading, I did get a little confused about who was who.
We haven't yet mentioned, which is showing how deeply intellectual and scholarly we are. We haven't mentioned that the author is Princess Diana's brother. So the famous Charles Spencer, who did the eulogy at her funeral. And I had no idea that he was a popular historian. He has written tons of stuff.
He has. And I have a friend who is super smart and reads so much history and biography. She said she reads everything he puts out and he does it very well.
I am assuming you didn't know a whole lot about this before you went in. And was it really accessible? Prose and explanation?
Yes, very much. Yeah.
Some lovely color photographs on glossy paper.
Yes. Another thing Spencer does is he does mention things that come out of this horrific time period. One of them being the Trappist monastic tradition comes out of this. One of the women who died on the ship, it was one of Henry's illegitimate daughters, another Matilda.
Yes, the one he turned back, the one that William turned back to try to save.
I think so, yeah.
And then she was an illegitimate daughter. That's right.
Yeah, so her husband had this, like a chapel built in her honor that eventually became like the first Trappist monastery. It developed into that over time, which is interesting.
Forgive me, I can't resist this. So, somebody's going to shoot me. But did Charles happen to say of Matilda or any of the Matildas that she needed no royal title to continue to generate her particular brand of magic? I couldn't resist.
Too funny. Well, you had to go there. I understand.
And we're being really silly. I'm being really silly. Have you seen a picture of Charles Spencer's son?
No, I have not.
Dropped it.
Smoking?
Oh my God. So back to more weighty matters. And Charles Spencer has a website, and you can order signed copies directly from him.
Yeah. One funny thing is that the foreskin of Jesus makes an appearance in the book.
Oh, well, that isn't a dick move. What?
Yes, I never heard about that. I mean, holy relics, body parts, like I've heard of that, but I never knew that Jesus's foreskin was a thing. And after Henry dies, they establish like a memorial to him, but a place of worship and reading, I think it was. And supposedly they had the foreskin of Jesus, but Spencer mentions that there were like a dozen of them floating around Europe at this time. So if you Google Jesus's foreskin, you'll find a good selection of articles.
Wow, I just am speechless.
Well, it's not, what is it? It's not exactly 8 days after Christmas, but he would have been circumcised 8 days after December 25th, even though he was probably born in the summertime, and that's a different story for another day.
Well, thanks for giving us the skinny on that. Well, that isn't a tease. The three people out there that didn't think they wanted to read this book will now also want to read this book. So what a great sales job you've done. Chris, thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me on again. I appreciate it.
Can't wait for you to come on again, and maybe with your partner in crime.
Yeah, Emmeli's totally up for it. We talked about it, and I do have my thinking cap on to recommend some mysteries to you.
Oh, I was hoping you'd have forgotten about that, but no.
Oh, no.
I am delighted to welcome a fellow booktuber to my channel, and we're Goodreads friends, and I didn't know when I invited her to come on Bite Size Book Chats that she's actually a booktuber, and so now I've subscribed to her channel, and I'm getting to know her channel, but welcome Ana from New York City.
Hi!
And she's not shy, as you can already tell, and her channel's name is Ana Wallace Johnson. And I would like to give you a chance to tell us about your channel, Ana.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am delighted to be on here to talk about a book that I love. My channel is Ana Wallace Johnson. I started it during the pandemic. I fell in love with BookTube. I have always loved reading, and I wanted to find a place where I could kind of encourage myself to read more, to hold myself accountable. And it's definitely been that. I've been able to hold myself accountable and have so much fun with it and meet so many people. And what I try to do is I try to read a book, not always, but if I'm able to, when I'm traveling, I try to read a book to accompany that location. For example, I was reading Ernest Hemingway when I was down in Key West, and I was able to tour his house, which is one of my favorite videos. When I was in Ukraine, I was trying to read a little bit of Eastern European literature, tried to kind of get my head into the space of where I physically am. If you also want to see a lot of footage of New York City, I can 100% provide that. Awesome. But yeah, that is my a very brief summary of my channel. Lots of different funny things.
And your personality just spills out within 2 minutes, so I'm really looking forward to falling into your channel and maybe never coming out again.
Yeah, thank Thank you. You'll be safe there.
So we are here to talk about an Irish novel. It is called Snowflake, which I love the title already. It makes me giggle, by Louise Nealon, and it came out in September, I believe, of this year. You loved it. Tell us why.
So I had this as an audiobook, and I would walk around everywhere listening to this. And what I loved about this book, it's so magical. There's something about this. The woman who is reading it does an amazing job. She's on the TV show Derry Girls. It's an Irish show, and she's on it. And she's an actress, and the way that she delivers it is amazing. What I love about this book is it's not trying to be anything except for exactly what it is. It follows 18-year-old Debbie. She is born about an hour away from Dublin. She was raised on a cow farm. And she works on this cow farm with her uncle, who in the opening chapters, you come to find out her uncle lives in a caravan, and it's her best friend. And in the opening chapter, she reveals that she was accepted into Trinity College, which is about an hour away. So through the novel, it shows you go from this village girl, essentially, to a big college girl. And that's not doing it justice. That sounds like, it's like an American Girl novel or something. But you come to find out her mother is struggling with this immensely debilitating mental problem. She comes to have a really close friend when she's in college. Santi, I believe is her name. And she also is struggling with mental health. Her uncle is struggling with mental health. As Debbie's coming to find her place in Trinity College, she's also revealing things about herself with mental health. It's a huge emphasis on mental health. And I think what's really interesting is it's following the interpretation of it from a small town to a larger area's interpretation of it. It's fantastic. And the writing is so vivid and beautiful. And she's 28 years old, which is around my age, but her insight into life is just stunning. The writing is amazing.
This is a debut.
Yes, which is crazy.
I believe she's written other stuff, but not a novel.
No. What's interesting is I guess they've actually, before it was even released, they picked it up for movie rights. So it'll be made into a movie, I guess. What I also liked is that there's no shock factor in it. It's a very tame book. Anybody could read this. You could be 15 years old to 95. You could read this and it could be a very enjoyable experience. There's nothing where nobody is not going to find something that they empathize with and that they relate to in this book. I come from a small town and I moved to New York City. Yeah. I mean, you can probably understand. There's something you can kind of like giggle, you'd be like, oh, I understand this. There's so much glamorizing moving to a larger place once you've moved out of a small town. But I don't think a lot of books that I've read really touch into how small towns shape you and the way that you think and how you acclimate to a different group of people. And I think that this book really touches on that.
I want to circle back to the audio narrator because while we were talking, I looked it up, and that is Louisa Harland.
Yes, okay. Yes.
And she's an actor on Derry Girls. So just to kind of finish up and tie up, link it to another book that I want to tell you about. Let me grab it. Fabulous debut Irish novel, Big Girl, Small Town by Michelle Gowan.
Oh,
do you know it?
No.
Okay.
But these all feel like the same kind of story.
This one is, small town. And this one is, the protagonist is, I want to choose my words carefully because I don't think it's named what her condition is. So I hesitate to name it, but it read like she was somewhere on the autism spectrum, possibly.
Okay.
And she works at the local fast food shop. And she loves sex. Not really big on hugging. And her grandmother is murdered at the opening of the novel, and it doesn't affect her in a way that you or I might think it would be normal. So it's in the background, and she's going to the fish and chips shop or whatever it is she works at every day, and sometimes she sleeps with her boss, and there's just something. It's not for everybody.
Yeah, it sounds like it's for me.
some of my friends didn't love it as much as I did, but I absolutely loved it. And the reason to tie it all together is the audiobook. I did it as an audio text combo where an audio text combo is I got the headphones on, I'm listening to the audiobook and reading it every word.
Wow.
And the audiobook of this one is narrated by another Dairy Girls actor.
Okay.
Nicola Coughlan, I believe I'm pronouncing it right. Nicola Coughlan. And she's also a Dairy Girls actor.
That sounds like a good romp.
So you try Big Girl, Small Town, and I will try Snowflake by Louise Nealon. Oh, one more question before we go.
Yes.
What the title? Does it mean snowflake as in this?
So it touches on a couple of things. From what I remember, I think it's an allusion to a poem that her mother writes. There's a tattoo reference as well. But I know that it also is touching, the phrase snowflake, right, as in the too sensitive or something. Yes, exactly.
Really sensitive millennials.
Exactly. Which is, her uncle seeing her as a snowflake now that she's moved to the big city.
Ana, I hope you'll come back.
I definitely will.